So hello, and thank you for joining Planet in Focus today. I'm Leslie Johnson, Senior Programmer, and I'm joined with filmmaker Nathan Havey, who is here with me to talk about his debut film, Beyond Zero, which chronicles the incredible story of Ray Anderson and his company Interface, which revolutionized sustainability in the manufacturing industry. So welcome, Nathan. How are you?
I'm great, and thanks very much for having me, and thanks for selecting the film.
Okay, thanks. So you are a first-time filmmaker with this film. So maybe you can tell me a little bit about yourself and your background and what connected you with Ray's story in the first place and why you wanted to make a film about him.
Sure, yeah. So I met Ray's story. I never had a chance to meet Ray, but I read his book, Confessions of a Radical Industrialist, in about 2010. And at the time, it actually caused me to change my career. I was somebody that was into kind of politics and that kind of change. But in reading the book, he makes a really compelling case that business is the sort of most powerful organizer of effort on earth. And that if we're going to rise to meet the challenges that our generation has got to rise to meet, then business is a sort of a major leverage point in modern society. And so I started learning how to do business consulting, specifically looking at how, in the model of Interface, how higher purpose and really a great workplace culture that helps people to become the best versions of themselves with care and psychological safety, as opposed to incentives and command and control and chewing people up. That those businesses not only can outperform their competitors in the market, but maybe more importantly, they can really help to find solutions for really tough challenges. And so about a decade goes by, and I have a chance to do a storytelling series in Atlanta. And remembering Interface, I asked my team if there's any way we could find somebody from Interface to tell a story. And Aaron Mizan, who is then and now the VP and Chief Sustainability Officer at Interface, was willing to tell a story. And so I remember the first phone call I had with her. I felt like I was going to talk to Oprah. Sweaty hands and so stars. She's just lovely, and she told me things that were not in that book, which was written in 2010, about the later chapters of what Interface was doing and what its ambition was now, and the way that it thought about what a company's duty is in this moment for environmental responsibility. And it was a frame I'd never heard. It was the most cutting edge thinking I'd encountered, and I'd been in space, and just said, holy smokes, like this word must get out. And then I had a chance to go deeper with some of the Interface team, current and past, and learned a lot of stuff that weren't in the books, and saw a pretty good hero's journey, and thought I gotta take a shot at this.
So your hero's journey there centers on Ray Anderson, and you had some really compelling footage from him. I mean, he kind of he's not with us today, unfortunately, but he sort of really lays down the vision in this amazing footage that you were able to find. So I was just curious, where kind of did that come from, and how did you kind of start constructing the film around that?
Yeah, it's an Interface somehow filmed most of what they did as soon as they started this journey. They really had the context that they were going to need to catalyze a second industrial revolution. And so they really tried to document their steps. Some of it was for an intended internal documentary on Ray, but a lot of it was just, we feel like this is important, and so let's record it in case somebody ever wants to study it and use it. And I'm not the first, and I won't be the last to go through that archive, and it's just so rich and it's so incredible. And I had earned the trust of the company in interacting with Aaron and some others over a couple of years. And so when I said I wanted to take a shot at it, and would you be willing to give me unfettered access to the archive, they said yes, and that was a linchpin that was critical. I mean, if I hadn't gotten that permission, then I would have stopped right there. But having the permission, the process of making the film was pretty simple. It was just 2 or 3 shoots with the current interviews, and then the rest of it was going through the archive. And it took 8 or 9 months to get through it. And I only went through probably 40% of it. but found what I needed to be able to construct the story that I had been told by the people that were there in the beginning, and the sort of the major dramatic tension in the third act of the film, and just there was such rich, incredible stuff that was in there. And I will confess, did a lot of this on airplanes, flying back and forth to consulting gigs, and there wasn't a small number of times that I'm like quietly sobbing in my seat because I got so invested in the story and the characters and the people, and to get to see these moments. And then the last bit is, Interface did an internal screening after we had submitted for festivals, and many of them had never seen the footage. And it was a really, really special thing to be able to go through it and bring some of it to light.
Must have been really emotional for them to see the final product.
And yeah, very much so. I mean, not a dry eye in the house is what they told me.
Well, let's talk about Interface. There are some incredible statistics at the end that you go through about 88% factory water reduction. All the factories are using renewable energy now. Really huge CO2 emissions reductions. So I'm wondering if you could go through, like, what are the key lessons that can be learned from what Interface did that allowed them to become so sustainable, not just sustainable, but to, purportedly give back, an environmental contribution out of the manufacturing industry. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the biggest lesson, Leslie, is that they say it in the film too, is that for most companies, unfortunately still, sustainability is a marketing function, and it literally is housed in the marketing department or the communications department, because it's essentially writing up reports and reporting metrics and some PR, and unfortunately a hell of a lot of greenwashing. And what separated Interface from this right from the beginning is that it was at the level of the core purpose of the company. When Ray said it wasn't, let's see if we can do this while we're, no. It became the number one thing that Interface existed to do. And that's very, very rare. And it's very different than the way that most companies approach this, but it's exactly what had so much of the company's energy behind this mission that demanded that they find ways to resolve the trade-off choices, right? And so the first thing is that. And then the second thing is, this was not a top-down initiative. This was the vision set at the top, but then empowering everybody in the company to figure out how they, in their job, could do something that would help to move the needle on it. And many of the stories of innovation that come from Interface were things that bubbled up from the factory floor that the executives never would have come up with. And I think that the kind of the two major lessons are those two things that most companies don't quite get right on this, and it's why there aren't more Interfaces in the market today.
Yeah, it did seem that, many of the big innovations that did come about were kind of, as a result of setting very lofty goals, which I thought, almost, you would think unattainable goals given, what type of sector, Interface was coming from. So they're setting these lofty goals. And then, some incredible innovation did come out of that. I'm just wondering, is that like a lesson that can be embraced in, going further in the manufacturing sector?
Yeah, and then there's two lessons on this one. One of them is the first cut of the film. We had a little anecdote that unfortunately didn't survive our audience review process. But Connie Hensler, who's the sort of the technically inclined factory manager that's one of the characters in our film, when they rolled out Mission Zero in 1999, she thought it was bullshit. Because as an engineer, she was like, but how can you can't make anything and actually have zero impact? It's like certain laws of thermodynamics. It technologically is not possible. And she just couldn't get past that. But then her manager said, Connie, it's a marketing thing. The slogan is a marketing thing, but let's see if we can get a 50% reduction in fibers. And she said, oh, okay, well, got it. And so then she'd really sink her teeth into what would we need to do if we did that, right? And so there's sort of a double-edged sword of the loftiness of the goal that for some, it can be so far from reality that they just can't even fathom it and they don't know where to start. And so it's important to make sure that you sort of have this, yes, there's the lofty goal, but what are the intermediate steps that will get us toward there, understanding that oftentimes with a lofty goal like that, it can literally be impossible. And indeed, in the way that they figured out how to do 100% recycled content for nylon, it was technically impossible. Everyone would have said there just simply is not a way to get there until they had achieved 50% and then 75%. And then the pathway to 100 revealed itself. And then it was, oh my gosh, it is possible, right? And so similarly, a lot of times when we look at a corporate vision, whether it's around sustainability or anything else, we get too constrained by what we can see now. And there is real power in saying, this is what needs to occur. Let's make that our mission, and understanding we don't know how we're going to get there, but we know the first couple of steps, and we just trust that the steps that will actually get us all the way there will reveal themselves once we're standing a few steps beyond where we are today.
It seems like a part of that too was accepting that failure in a short-term sense would also be part of that, and to not kind of fear any sort of short-term failures and to trust that it would lead to this long-term success, which I think is also kind of a major part of the story.
Very much so. And from a management perspective, and this is something that I work with companies about a lot, is, the traditional way that you work in a company is, the HR folks and your managers sort of have this one tool, which is, write-ups. And if you don't do what you're supposed to do, or if you make a big mistake, then you get written up. And if you get written up 2 or 3 times, then you are fired. And that basic management practice that is still taught in basically every management school around the world is something that creates an atmosphere of psychological unsafety, which incentivizes people to play it safe and to hide the mistakes they do make for fear of getting written up. And both of those things are absolute killers for innovation. So companies have to learn how to, yes, you're enforcing accountability, which is really the purpose of that. But if you do it in a psychologically safe way, not only is it really better for the human beings that work inside of that kind of a culture, but it has people say, hey, look, I screwed this up. Can we all figure out how to make this better? And when you have everybody in the culture doing that, the innovation just goes. It's exponential. But you do have to make it safe inside of the culture for people to be able to try new and different things and not be disciplined when it doesn't work out. There are some companies that actually have a mandated failure rate of some of these innovation things, where if you're not failing 60% of the time, then you're not being bold enough. And the incentives that creates as an intention, it really helps companies to get this right. And when you have that in the context of a bold, world-changing kind of vision, that's where the magic happens.
Yeah, I guess in talking about the company culture, something that struck me is sort of like along the way to get to sustainability and the net positive impact. It's kind of an interesting study, like within the company, of how, bringing together a lot of people that have like so many different ideas and probably very different value sets at the end of the day can come together and create positive change like that. You had people who are biologists who are working against the finance people, but at the end of the day, they were kind of all together under this one structure with that set of goals to make that happen, which I think for today is quite a strong something that we can all learn from, really.
Very much so. And what kind of happens there, and what certainly happened for Interface, is by refusing traditional thinking for this says, well, it's this or that. Either the biologists win or the finance people win. Which will it be? And the lesson here, and this is a lesson that is starting to be really seen by even folks in high finance in the United States and around the world, is that when you're facing a trade-off choice like that, it's not true It's a limitation of the thinking that you're using to frame up the choice. And that if you just decline the choice for a minute, take a step back and start over, ideally involving both of those sides so that it's not you doing this exercise and thinking you're going to come up with some brilliant insight, but it's the group talking about what each group needs. They can usually find something that resolves the either or trade-off into something that neither could see by themselves, but both now can recognize as, holy smokes, that's totally a better way to do it. Hey, we've got a couple of anecdotes for how that stuff can happen in the film, but again, we see this all the time, and it's just a little bit of a different approach to decision making and problem solving. And it sort of starts with this assumption that whenever you're facing a trade-off choice like that, there isn't a correct choice. The correct choice is to decline the thinking that led to the choice and go back to the drawing board to see if there's a way that you can align incentives.
So if a manufacturing company like Interface can do this, what is stopping other companies from doing this? And are we seeing a ripple effect that has happened from this story?
So I'm gonna answer those in the reverse order. Yes, we're seeing a ripple effect. I just yesterday was at a summit of CEOs that are really interested in leading businesses that are like this. 150 people, and they all have companies that are, they're not Fortune 500, but they're big, significant companies, many with hundreds of thousands of employees that are studying how do we do this stuff. So there's a growing movement all around the world, and it goes by names like B Corps and Conscious Capitalism, and the We Mean Business Coalition. This is a rising tide. It's still, the distribution of innovation curve on this, we're still at the beginning of it, but it's coming. And Ray was one of just a handful of people that kicked it off all the way back in the mid 90s and a little bit before that. But now it's starting. So yes, ripple effects are being seen. It's coming. Is it happening fast enough? No. We've got to accelerate this kind of stuff, right? And so then that brings us to the first part of your question, which is why aren't more companies doing this at really high levels? That is my question. I put that exact question to Erin Mizan at Interface after the film had been selected for its first couple of festivals, and her read on it is that it's not for lack of technological understanding. We've got that. It's not for lack of metrics and really robust, sophisticated frameworks for accounting and measurement. All of that is in place. The thing that she says the biggest gap is sort of the understanding of people within companies that care about this stuff, to understand the effective ways that you can lead change inside of a hierarchy, regardless of your hierarchical position. And she points us toward the work of this woman named Leith Sharp. Leith, Leith Sharp. She's in Australia, and she runs the Harvard program on sustainability change leadership. But she has this incredible framework that can train anybody at any level of a company for exactly what it is that you need to do to be able to lead this kind of change. And we've been working with Leith and Erin and others to try to make this kind of stuff available through something called the Institute for Corporate Transformation. And so if folks are interested in that, they can go look that up. But that is what Erin and now I have come to believe is the major gap. And if we can't close that gap quickly, then we, this is our decade. We've really got to see how much progress we can make in the next 8 now years.
So you think that it's more of an issue of kind of coming from like within what company structures are like than it is sort of necessarily what it is that a company is doing. So any company essentially can sort of like take these principles and kind of apply what they did.
Yeah, not only can they, but they must. One of the things that's on the cutting room floor from Paul Hawken is he talks about, he can understand that there's different flavors of this. But if we're not working on climate change right now, what are we doing? And so again, cutting room floor, but that's very much where he is on this. And yes, every company can do it. Obviously, there's some companies like an Interface that if they do it, it'll create more of an impact on global greenhouse gas and all that kind of stuff. But even professional services firms that may not have a huge carbon footprint for any company to get beyond zero. It is increasingly an imperative right now, and we're starting to see it. The largest asset holder in the world is a company called BlackRock, and for 3 years running now, they've said, CEOs, if you don't have a higher purpose for your company, something beyond profit that your company exists to achieve in the world, and if you don't have a strategy for getting carbon neutrality, then we're going to divest. Right, and I can't name the company, but I'm aware of a very large Fortune 500 company. It's a name that everyone will know. That privately, their CEO was very much against setting a carbon target, very much against it. Got a call from an investor, I don't know which one, and a week later they had announced that they were going to meet the commitment of Paris, which is carbon neutrality by 2050. Now, I don't think that's enough, but it's a start. And now the game is, can we accelerate all of this and see how fast we can get it done?
So, we talked about sort of like changes from like within, and shareholders. But what about how like, just your general average person who is a consumer or who is interacting with these companies? How can, we kind of go about holding companies to account to make those kinds of changes?
Yeah, it's the perfect question. And so I think that there's maybe two things that I would suggest on that. And one of them is, one of the things that we talk about in the movie, right, is the scene where they're going to the big hotel in Maui. And one of the Eco Dream team says, like, that place only exists because we are the way we are. Right. And we can point the finger at big companies and we can look at all this kind of stuff, but really we each have to look at the way that we are living and our own carbon footprint in what we consume for our families, in all this kind of stuff. Right. And so there are wonderful resources that are out there that can help each of us to just live our ethics on this. And it's there's literally $1 trillion in the United States that's spent every year trying to get us to never mind that stuff, just buy this, that, whatever, go on the vacation, do this, you deserve, right? And none of that has the complexity of what our generation has to achieve as its motivating factor. And so at the moment, it's on us. And so we really do need to figure out how we can live in a way that is sustainable and in accordance with our values, right? And so number one, that's the thing for everybody. And when you do that, it tends to be that you start to see your decision to spend money differently. What you buy, how often you buy it, what you choose to eat, the kinds of clothes and fibers that you wear. There's a wonderful resource for this. It's called Drawdown. And again, it's a book by Paul Hawken. And it's got a ton of free resources on the net where you can actually go and see what makes the most difference. Is it meat? Is it non-organic cotton? Is it your electricity bills and light? What is it that is actually your greatest carbon footprint, and what can you do that would have the highest leverage stuff? And I think if everybody could go to Drawdown and just get acquainted with the climate science and what needs to happen there, then that is the biggest thing. And then the more that if you can't figure out whether something you're buying is going to be good or not, ask. Write the company and ask, because believe me, just like with Interface, right? The whole journey started because they couldn't answer the question, what are you doing about the environment, right? And so if you're the person that asked that question, you could be the person that starts other Interface stories. And we got to start as many as we can right now. So that's what I would say to that.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, you've also given us some great resources there to consider. So what is next for the film and what is next for yourself?
I wish I knew. So it's my first film. And so I don't know what I'm doing. We've gotten phenomenal interest from film festivals like Planet and Focus. We've gotten great interest from business professors from all around the world that want to show this film and use it as a case study to teach their students a different way of doing business. And we've gotten phenomenal interest from corporate boards that are really interested in showing, not only executives, but whole staffs this example, so that they can kind of get together and say, how do we accelerate this? How do we raise our level of ambition? And so, I think we're trying to, the other thing I'll mention is all of that has happened without a dime of promotion budget. It's all been word of mouth so far, and so we're still trying to kind of find more of those corporate partners that often can help us to raise the money that we need to pay off our production expenses, and then hopefully have some additional capital to get this story out there. Our vision is to have this in classrooms and boardrooms in all of the world's top 20 economies, and so far we've gotten that kind of interest from business schools and from film festivals. But imagine what we could do if we had some resources to actually promote the film and try to make it a household name within sort of business people. That was what Interface wanted to do with its own story since the very beginning. They got to a certain place, and then when Ray died, there was nobody that was going out there telling the story anymore. And so again, Connie Hensler, who is the factory manager, she actually participated in the first live screening that we had for the film. It was on the 27th anniversary of the day that Ray gave his very first speech starting the journey. And so we were in Atlanta. We had only 70 people in a 350 person theater to try to be somewhat COVID conscious. But Connie wrote me about 3 days later and said, Nathan, one of the biggest things when Ray died was, who's going to tell the story now? And there hasn't been a good answer to that question. But this film now, if this can get out, it's the first thing that we've seen that can sort of do what Ray did. And we're really hoping that this is something that can really get picked up and seen all over the place. And so for any viewers of this recording, and anybody that's come and seen the film and be inspired by it, we need help. We need help getting it out there. And so anything that you can think to do, we would be very, very grateful for any assistance you can offer.
Where can we get in touch with you?
Sure. My email, nathan.havey@gmail.com. That's Havey like Harvey without the R. And the website for the film is beyondzerofilm.com. And so either of those would get to me and the team that's trying to get this thing out around the world. One other thing that if I may mention is a lot of the people that were inspired by the film have kind of been collaborating on something called 100 Months to Change. So the day after the Atlanta premiere was the day that there are 100 months left in the decade. At this moment, it's 99. And so, this is the decade that we need to get as much done this decade as is possible. And so there's a global coalition that's starting to come around this to share best practices, learn together, and figure out how we together can accelerate the emergence of what is needed for this kind of business to become the default mode of business on Earth. And if folks are interested in that, 100monthstochange.com, you'll see what's happening and you'll see how you can get involved.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Those are great. And I hope that all of our viewers will follow up with that and check out those links and get in touch with Nathan. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a really excellent discussion.
Well, thank you very much again, Leslie, for selecting the film and for providing this platform for this conversation. I really appreciate it.